All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking real music in real time for a few real people out there just like you, just like me. All right, before we get going, this is Landfall, really cool band from Brazil. Uh, Jeff Scott Soto says the lead singer is a bit like Steve Perry, says he's the Brazilian version of Perry. I don't know if that's true or not, Jeff. I like Jeff, though. Jeff is pretty much spot on with a lot of his ideas and analysis. But Guy Oliver, that's his name. And the rest of the band, by the way, is really good. So if I'm just talking about Guy, I apologize in advance to the rest of the guys in the group. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Eric Martin, too, from Mr. Big. And what's kind of interesting is the band does a song on this album called Heroes Are Forever. And it's a tribute to the late, great Pat Torpey, the drummer of Mr. Big, who was just an amazing drummer. And so much so that the band has had trouble kind of regrouping and getting back out there on the road. I hear rumors that they might for next year. But anyway, in the meantime, you've got Elevate from Landfall. This is a cool band. Check it out, courtesy of our friends over at Frontiers Music. Now, does it sound like Journey, by the way? Because it's the Steve Perry thing. I don't know. It's not quite like Journey. And what I wanted to talk about was Steve Perry and Neal Schon today in this series of videos that I've been doing, talking about, it's kind of a shame. It's the real truth, the sad truth, however you want to describe these videos. I've been hitting on this theme because, quite honestly, the sad truth about Neal Schon and Steve Perry is at this stage, I don't think these guys are ever going to get together again. It's going to take kind of like a life-altering, life-ending circumstance, much like what happened with Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen. Eddie was sick, and Sammy finally got to reach out and say some stuff. And apparently they were on good terms at the end. And by the way, I'm not wishing any illnesses on Neal or Steve or anything like that. I'm thinking, though, that it would take a circumstance like that to bring these two guys together. As you know, Steve Perry has filed to block 20 trademarks that Journey, or at least Neal Schon and John Cain, wanted to do for song titles. And Perry, missed the initial deadline to kind of stop it. And now he's taken some legal action. This happened back in 2020. Neal Schon is fired back saying, look, hey, I'm managing the business, although now Journey is under new management. They've got the manager who's also in charge of Def Leppard handling their affairs now, which I think is a really smart move. So a lot of people are wondering, though, about the 50th anniversary. Hey, this would be a great time to bring Steve back. Well, that was settled, at least for the time being, not too long ago, where Neal Schon says there's no chance for Steve Perry to join Journey. This was back in October. Neal Schon seems quite determined not to let Steve Perry join the band. Now, the way this is written is kind of silly, because Neal wasn't determined prior to this to keep Perry out. What Neal had been saying for a very long time is the door is always open for Steve Perry. Now, if Perry hadn't decided to try to stop the trademarks, which I think will be decided sometime next year, I don't know. These things move so slowly. And then you've got the Neal Schon, John Cain situation. And a lot of people thought that would be the end of Journey. And look, one difference between Neal Schon and Steve Perry and Neal Schon and Jonathan Cain is Neal Schon wants to keep going. Like, he really wants to keep playing music. He wants to perform live. Some people would say, well, he's motivated by money because these days, that's where all the money is. You go out on the road and you try to be like the biggest tour of the year. Journey came out with Freedom this year. Good album, really good album. If you listen to it from start to finish, you're going to find a lot of great music on that album. Production values, yeah, I don't know what happened there. I do think the record label would be really smart, take those songs back in and try to fix them a little bit to try to bring out stronger production on it. With the technology that's available today, I don't see why that would be a problem. And you could repackage it, maybe throw a couple of bonus tracks on there. Steve Perry, with his Christmas album from last year, he's got 2 new songs that came out this year. That's how busy Steve Perry is, okay? Steve is content. He's not the guy who's going to be out on the road anytime soon. You would think, honestly, that he could take this Christmas music on the road, maybe do like a 90-minute concert. Seriously, sit down, kind of chill. You know, he doesn't have to stand if he doesn't want to. He can just hang out and tell some stories and sing a few of these Christmas songs. He tends to like to be the storyteller. So I think that would work for him, but he didn't do it. And those tickets would sell out quickly, and Steve could get whatever price he wanted to get. If he teams up with Irving Azoff over at Ticketmaster, that dynamic pricing structure would kick in, and you'd be talking, hey, I bought my Steve Perry Christmas concert ticket for 10 grand. I was so happy I got that ticket, you know? Yeah, okay. Look, Steve is just active enough to be in the news and to be talked about every so often. He may have more solo material out there. Vocally, let's just be honest, because that's what I do here. I try to be honest and frank. Steve is not the same guy he was. And I think people who are trying to just be realists hear his voice and go, okay, I still like his voice, but it's very different. It's very different. It's not the same Steve. I remember when Traces came out and I said some stuff like that. And people were like, what do you mean Steve of today versus Steve of 1982? What do you mean by that? So people are very defensive and they love Steve Perry. And because of that, Neal Schon, I think for a very long time, tried to kind of harness that love that people have for Steve Perry and say, look, I love Steve too. I don't know what year it was, but Steve Perry was the main focus of Journey concerts. Well, not the main focus, but Neal Schon would get out there and say, hey, I wrote this song with Steve Perry. This is for Steve Perry. And you would think the word would get back to Steve Perry, and it probably did. And so Steve Perry explains why none of that really matters to him. He says, I'm not sure it's possible to work with Neal Schon ever again because it would stir up the hopes of a reunion. This is a quote from a famous Rolling Stone article from a few years ago. Perry says, please listen to me. He's trying to make a point here. I left the band 31 bleeping years ago, my friend. You can still love someone. Interesting, he says that, but not want to work with them. And if they only love you because they want to work with you, that doesn't feel good to me. All right. So Perry settles it on the issue of working with Neal Schon. Now, at this point, Neal Schon was saying stuff like, hey, we could work together, but you don't have to call it Journey. We can write songs. It could be the, you know, the Perry Schon project outside of Journey. I don't know, all of the legal battles that would ensue after that, you know. I think John Cain would be like, nope, can't do that. You know, it's too much like Journey, or, hey, you're using Perry again, and we already negotiated and he's out, you know. But Neal Schon never stopped trying, especially when Traces came out. Neal Schon was like, okay, here's my opportunity, kind of rope him back in. And, you know, you heard Neal saying, hey, I'd love to sit down and have a cup of coffee with Perry. And Perry's like, no, he just wants to work with me. He really just doesn't he doesn't like me as a friend, or he doesn't really like me for who I am. He's more interested in working with me, which might be true. It might be true. I do think, though, there was some, maybe it was staged camaraderie at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. It did look like people were happy to see one another. Even people that you dislike, after a long period of time, when you see them again, you're like, okay, yeah, I remember. We had some good times together. And Perry, he reminisced about writing patiently with Neal Schon. And Neal claims, that he and Perry have chemistry. And I think they do have chemistry. I think those three guys, Schon, Kane, and Perry, had chemistry. They had really good chemistry for a few years. But I think Perry became very heavy-handed. He wanted to kind of expunge the old Neal Schon from the, spaceman Afro days. He wanted that to go away. And what he wanted was more of an R&B Neal Schon. Like, hey, you need to lay down a cool riff for me to sing over, like a more of an R&B sound to it. Same with the drumming. Hey, that's Steve Smith. He's just too technical. He's just too crazy. He's too jazz fusion. I want somebody in the pocket just going to play this pocket drumming, this rhythm thing. And I need a bass player who can lay down a big fat bass line like Randy Jackson. And Perry got everything he wanted. And again, this is why I did that video about Neal Schon and the shotgun wedding, because my theory is, and I'm pretty sure Neal would validate this, is that he probably feels a little unfulfilled, in the sense that even though they made a ton of money and they were super successful and they have the #1 downloaded song of all time, that he would have loved to have gone down that road that he and Greg were going down. And he would have been happy doing that. And in hindsight, you don't sell records anymore, or most people don't sell records anymore. You'd be doing like the whole Dead and Company thing, or maybe not exactly like that, but you'd be playing big stadiums and you'd just be jamming out on guitar. And when you listen to Neal Schon's solo work, you realize that this guy has so much pent up energy all the time. That's why you see him dropping these Twitter videos or Instagram videos, whatever they are, where he's just out there noodling. And, Sammy Hagar, I think, said at one point that Neal Schon is the only guitar player he's ever heard that plays something different every time. Like, he could play a song that he's always played, but he plays it different. He sits down and he does something different on that song. He's always being creative and inventive, and that's in the guy's brain. That's just his brain to his hands doing that stuff. So, I'm not trying to take sides necessarily in this video, but one guy has been a bit of a recluse for, 30 years. And he admitted it. Hey, I left music. Hey, I lost my passion for music. That was the narrative when he came back from Traces. And I kind of did, I did some videos where I said, well, Steve, you did this thing with David Foster, and you did something with David Pack, and you did something with Jeff Golub, and he did a few things. He wasn't just completely silent. Yeah, he was going to see, the baseball games, and he's in the crowd and he's lip syncing to Don't Stop Believin'. And isn't that interesting how they made that like the theme song? And he being in the stadium doing the whole lip syncing to the song and cheering his team on, that fueled the love for that song even more. So without him even trying, he became, a great promoter of the song in a new era. And then, it's in the right movie, it's in the right TV show, and people just respond to it. And so these guys have this amazing eternal cash cow, both of them. But the sad truth is that, that song is not enough to get these guys together again, even on a friendship basis. In fact, It's the reason probably why these guys are so hell-bent on grabbing every penny that they can from this catalog, which will go on in perpetuity. Now, hopefully, Hypnosis will market some of the new material. Of course, my theory is you got to go and remaster this album Freedom, because it's actually pretty good. If you go and listen to Freedom from start to finish, there are 4 or 5 ringer songs that in the old days would be all over radio. Radio wouldn't be making fun of these songs. They'd be saying, you know what? This is vintage Journey. And the critics, too, who went down a list of all of these old bands this year. I was on one website where they're talking about all these classic artists who put out new albums this year. And they did mention Def Leppard, by the way. No mention of Journey on their list whatsoever. After 11 years of not putting out music, they just chose to omit Journey. Like it didn't even happen. And I'm sorry, people. You'll hear the kind of Journey music that you grew up on. Now, again, people who don't like Arnell, they have this blockage, But the sad truth is Journey did continue without Perry, and they are making money, and they are selling out arenas, and they did do a fairly good job at Lollapalooza. The critics were like, hey, this is pretty good. We didn't know what to expect. And there were a lot of people, by the way, who watched that concert, and they were very skeptical. I was one of them saying, why is Journey going to Lollapalooza? But it worked. The younger fans can't get enough of that song. They just can't get enough of it. They'll listen to it over and over again. And they like Arnell because he's athletic and he's out there running around still after, 15 years, something like that. And he sounds pretty good. He doesn't sound as good as he used to sound when he first joined the band. He was far more convincing. And he's not a doppelganger. I keep reading this. I hate when people say it's just a knockoff of Perry. No, he's his own thing. I think Steve Jerry was more of a knockoff of Perry. I think Dean Castronovo might be more of a knockoff of Steve Perry without, some of Perry's more soulful characteristics, we'll say. I don't know how anybody really duplicates that. It's very, very hard to do. But again, if you're looking for some kind of a reconciliation at this point between Neal Schon and Steve Perry, it's sad. It's not going to happen. And on the 50th anniversary, though, you would expect, hey, you haven't been with a band for a very long time. Why don't you come out and sing a couple of songs with us? It's like the Lou Gramm thing that happened with Foreigner. And then it became like, hey, you can hang out for the whole concert. You don't have to sing on every track. I mean, Steve could just, go off stage and come back on stage. Maybe he could put on some tails again. Maybe he could dress up. Maybe he could have that leopard print shirt. It would be, people would go, look, this is a storybook possibility. Like if somebody said to Steve, hey, we'll pay $100 million to go out on tour with Journey, or to just show up and do a couple of songs. No strings attached, just because we think we can make a lot of money on this. And people want to see you one last time. It's still not going to happen. It just isn't going to happen. And it is really sad. Steve is comfortable. He's happy. He's got what he wants. Neal Schon, never content, never happy. And I don't mean like he doesn't like his life or anything like that. I'm sure he likes his life, but his DNA is to keep pushing, keep moving forward. If you listen to like Neal's solo albums over the years, they're all very progressive and very melodic and contain just a lot of superb guitar playing, which, you expect from Neal Schon. But I think a lot of people overlook the fact that the guy is just creative in a way that a lot of human beings can't be creative that way. It just is. And Steve Perry too, in his heyday, he was the guy who was very creative. I think Steve and Neal both need to collaborate and they're better when they collaborate. Same thing with John Cain. And so these three guys are still on planet Earth. And Steve, even in his different vocal capacity, I believe, could still create something with Neal and even with John, although his response to the question about John Cain was actually worse than his response to what the interviewer was inquiring when it came to Neal, Schon. It's just like, basically, don't talk to me. I don't want to talk about John. Okay. So again, I don't know what would get these guys back together again. But the sad truth is, it's not happening for the 50th, and it's probably not happening ever. It would be much like the Eagles getting back together again when Don Henley said hell would have to freeze over, and it did, and hence the irony of the whole Hell Freezes Over tour. I mean, maybe Journey could do something like that, although they'd have to get permission from Don Henley to do anything like that. So you don't want to confuse the two, but it would be probably even more impossible than seeing the Eagles back together again. By the way, you know, the Eagles have been doing this now since what, the early 90s, and they're still going, and they don't even have Glenn Frey anymore. So for all of you who think that certain bands shouldn't go on, can't go on, I get it, but there is enough of an interest in this music where if the band has the trademark, they have the name, and they go out there and they put a pretty decent product out, and people enjoy it, and people can blow off some steam and get away from this crazy, I don't know, insane world. It's, okay, sure, I'll go. And in a lot of cases, it'll bring back better memories from your childhood, and you'll have a good time with, you know, your wife or your friends or whoever you're going to go with. Anyway, folks, I'm just kind of rambling on here. Again, the sad truth is there isn't going to be a reconciliation between Steve Perry and Neal Schon anytime soon. And like I say, it'll probably take some sort of life-changing event to snap people out of their financial stupor, because that's what it is to some degree. No trademarks over here, no credit card over there. You know, it's just, okay, guys, I think you guys have enough money. I think you just have to work out your own personal, you know, love for money and get over it and be content with what you have. But nobody seems to be content with what they have. So, and that's everybody involved, whether it's Schon, Cain, Perry, whoever. I think the old guys like Ross and Smith, they got out and they just wanted to live their lives, and they got whatever they needed, and now they're just happy to be maybe somewhat wealthy. I don't know. With Ross Valerie, I'm just not sure. He didn't do too well investing back in the 90s. Anyway, here is Landfall, Elevate. Get off the old music train and find some new material to go listen to. These guys are pretty good. They're from Brazil, and their singer, again, sounds a bit like Steve Perry and Eric Martin combined, and I think you'll enjoy it. If not, I have other things out there I can suggest, and I'll be doing that in future videos. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I don't say that enough. I'm grateful. 63,000 subscribers right now, and still growing a little bit. Also, Patreon, if you want to sign up for $1 a month, $2 a month. And I have another channel. It's called The Radical Independent that you can check out as well, where I talk politics, and I'm getting a lot of flack over there right now because I was kind of saying some stuff about the 45th president of the United States, and some people didn't appreciate that, but you know, you got to say what you believe, and that's what I was saying. So in any event, thanks for watching, and I will see you very soon.